Donald Trump's impeachment trial starts today. Now, we're going to talk about in a bit after the break. What is the argument that Donald Trump is making about the impeachment? What is the argument that his lawyers will make about the impeachment? But first, let's talk about what should happen in this impeachment. If this was a fair world where actions had consequences, even if you're the president, there should be probably a secret ballot for impeachment so that senators would not be bullied into voting to acquit merely to avoid what might be the political consequences. There should be a secret ballot, and there should be a unanimous conviction of Donald Trump based on the evidence that we've seen. Now, there's a really good article, an op-ed in The Hill. I hope I'm pronouncing his last name correctly. It's Douglas Meek, K-M-I-E-C. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And Douglas points out that the entire argument that will take up the first day in today's Senate impeachment trial, which is the impeachment trial even constitutional? That is not the duty of the Senate to determine. The duty of the Senate is not to determine whether this is constitutional. First of all, it is. And secondly, why would you put many non-legal scholars, non-legal professionals in a position of deciding about the constitutionality of something? It really doesn't make sense. What jurors in the Senate should be determining is whether Donald Trump could reasonably foresee that the consequences of him saying it's all rigged for a month or 2 months. Let's go down to the Capitol. We're marching down to the Capitol. Rudy Giuliani, trial by combat, all of this stuff. Was it foreseeable that the uncontested reality of what took place was something that was likely to take place? That is what the determination ultimately needs to be. Donald Trump doesn't have the law on his side when it comes to avoiding impeachment because of some constitutional issue. But in any case, that's not really what the Senate should be deciding. And there is really no disagreement about what took place on January 6th. As Douglas Meek points out, even Trump's defense team acknowledges the facts of what took place on January 6th, which was a violent insurrection attempt at the U.S. Capitol. So then it becomes a question of really common sense. Remember, this is not a court of law, the Senate. Was it reasonable for Donald Trump to foresee what took place? And it's very hard to imagine that the answer is no. Donald Trump was reportedly gleeful in the early hours of the insurrection. Donald Trump reportedly resisted sending law enforcement, which would have quelled or limited what took place. And only when Donald Trump was convinced that the political consequences could be too grave did he come out and give that mealy-mouthed sort of statement about, oh, we've got to be peaceful and all of this stuff. So that's what should happen. Trump won't be convicted and the voting won't be by secret ballot. I was actually thinking, imagine that there was a secret ballot where instead of voting out loud publicly, senators voted secretly. Imagine that you end up with 80 votes to convict. So 30 Republicans voted to convict, but none of them are willing to admit it. You know what would happen, right? They would again start with voter fraud. Supposedly 80 votes to convict, and we can't find a single Republican willing to say, yes, I voted to convict. But you know what? It's going to be a moot point because they're not going to convict. And then it will be up to voters to determine whether they care enough to force consequences upon these Republican senators in the 2022 election. Now, as a reminder, when we talk about representative democracy, a majority of Americans say that Donald Trump should be convicted and barred from holding office in the future. 56% of Americans. We looked at that ABC poll yesterday. Trump's lawyers are saying that the entire trial is merely political theater, and the arguments that they are making in their early legal brief, and we will see today and tomorrow more so, how they actually make this case a reality. They are both saying that the entire process is unconstitutional and that the House's impeachment vote was extraordinarily biased. And they are going to say that this is censorship and it's an attempt to silence Donald Trump. And of course, that's not what it is. Donald Trump was able to say whatever the hell he wanted. And now there may be consequences to him saying that. Remember, free speech doesn't mean freedom from all consequences to your speech. One other little note. Apparently, Trump's defense team is planning to show clips of what they say are examples of Democrats urging violence from last year. So I think that there's going to be a lot of interesting moments during this, but ultimately we are going to get the political theater is going to be Trump's defense. We are going to get an acquittal. And then ultimately we will see if the American people decide that these Republican senators need to be held accountable. The American public often has a short memory. So I am not particularly optimistic that Republican senators who have prejudged this and already know they are going to acquit will be held accountable. It would be nice if they were, but I don't anticipate that. And we will be live streaming the impeachment on the David Pakman Show YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook channels. I hope you'll join me. But in the meantime, let me know via Twitter what you expect to see in this trial. You can find me on Twitter at @dpakman. I want to take a second to tell you about one of our sponsors, S&H Masks. S&H Masks has everything you need when it comes to face masks and other protective gear for COVID-19, and they're giving my audience 20% off. S&H Masks is the company that I've personally been going to for face masks. I love and trust the products they sell, and that's actually why I reached out to them about being a sponsor. I've tried tons of different face masks this year, like many of you, and I still have not found a mask that is more comfortable or easier to breathe in than the washable cotton masks that they sell. It's made of a silky, lightweight cloth that feels great on the skin, has a convenient adjustable strap. They also have disposable cloth masks, which are really comfortable, as well as all of the other gear like face shields, alcohol wipes, no-touch infrared thermometers. And all of their prices are very reasonable. I also love S&H Masks because they've donated over 60,000 masks to healthcare institutions. They're an excellent company. Shipping is just $5 and shipping is free on orders over $150. You can get there by going to davidpakman.com/mask. The link is under this video, and you can save 20% on everything in their store when you use the coupon code DAVID.